Welcome to Why Like Ike. I'm Dennis Weiss. I work for Eagle Communications. Sitting with me today, Pam Sanfilippo and David Haight. Now, David, I want to start with introducing you because I've never had anybody introduced like this before. I said, so who's David? He says, well, he was an archivist here forever and he still really comes over here and does things for us, but we don't pay him anymore. And so that means you're a very valuable guy. If they still let you in and you know, I had to bring a camera before they'd even give me a pair of white gloves around here. So tell us about your work in the archives through the years, quickly.
Well, I was an archivist for 37 years, wow. 4 months, and I was involved in basic archival processing, manuscript collection, working with researchers, and I got in working with school groups, and eventually I got involved in declassification. I was trained to do review by applying guidelines issued by the appropriate government agencies to review and attempt to declassify, if authorized, certain documents and determine which required further review. Those would hold back, and if someone requested them, a researcher requested, which they could do, would submit them to Washington for review.
Well, that explains why they introduced you that way, because you're one of the people that made all of this available for us to have out in front of a camera and can talk to people about today.
Had a lot of help.
Yeah, there's a lot of help here. So Pam, the reason we're just putting this on television in March is because next month you have a program here and it's focused on what's on the poster over there, and that's Vietnam.
Correct.
Tell us about that.
Remembering Vietnam. So here at the Eisenhower Library, we're participating in a larger National Archives-wide Remembering Vietnam program. Our specific focus will be April 14th, Saturday. We'll be doing programming throughout the day. We'll have Chris Lovett, who's a history professor and Vietnam vet from Emporia State University, here to give a keynote speech. We'll have a panel of Vietnam veterans, including David. We'll participate in that. And then one of the other things we're doing in conjunction with Kansas Humanities Council is to conduct oral histories of veterans. And we're hoping to collect several of those and work with the Library of Congress to get those archived in Library of Congress. So.
I'm very excited about that. I took a call that said we're going to do this project and how can Eagle be a part of that, and my answer was I don't know, but I certainly want to. I do. I want to be a part of that project. It's one of those projects that it's a forever kind of a thing.
Yes.
Needs to be done now. And it needs to be at the Eisenhower Presidential Library and Museum forever.
Yes.
Yeah, so exciting.
Yeah.
So that's our outreach. We're going to talk about some stuff. We're going to talk about a period of time today through this program of Why Like Ike. But our action item is really, we want people to come appreciate this program in April 14th.
April 14th, yes.
Here on campus. It'll be an outstanding day.
Yes. And if any Vietnam vets out there are interested in sharing their stories with us, get in touch with us, and we'd love to set up those oral history interviews.
So other than the 3 people sitting at the table today, they go, Eisenhower Vietnam, what's the connection there? So you've thoughtfully placed right in front of me a little memorandum of record, April 22nd, 1955, General Joe Collins comments. And it's speaking about to Eisenhower what was going on in Vietnam, and page 2 will come out with a recommendation. So Eisenhower was certainly in a position of power in 1955. Tell us a little bit about that time, Dave.
Okay, first of all, I guess the question always would come to my mind, why Vietnam? Why is it? Well, if you know, Vietnam was part of French Indochina. It was a French colony since the mid-19th century. So the French were in there throughout the end of the 20th century. Then World War II broke out. France was overrun by the Germans. Japanese eventually moved into Indochina, and then the war was over. Japanese pushed out, and France was liberated. And France was determined to take their colony back. So they took their colony back, and And in 1946, fighting broke out between the French and what was known as the Viet Minh, and what's called the First Indochina War broke out. Well, we were concerned, you put this in the perspective of the global Cold War. The United States policymakers, at the time President Harry Truman and his national security advisors were concerned that communism was on the move. Soviet Union is hostile. And then, not make things worse, China, in the midst of a civil war, failed to under control Mao Zedong and the communists. In 1950, even make things worse, Kim Il-jung and North Koreans attacked South Korea. So we saw there's a global, it appeared to policymakers that there's this communist threat and it was on the move everywhere. So in 1950, President Truman sent the first military mission to Indochina to help the French. And the French made it clear that they were fighting the free world. At least they told Eisenhower. Eisenhower first, or at least he certainly became well aware. I'm sure he knew what was going on, but in 1951, as he went to Europe as a first Supreme Allied Commander of the NATO forces, to go around and talk to various governments on how much they could help support the alliance, the French said they would do that, but the President of France told the President, we're fighting the free world's fight in Indochina. We're not fighting Indochina for ourselves. We're not fighting there for ourselves, but for you. If Indochina falls, Siam, India, Burma, the Philippines all fall. So that's what became an early version of the domino theory. Mm-hmm. And then in 1954, Eisenhower enunciated this very clearly in a press conference, July 7th, 1954. He said, you take a row of dominoes. We knock one over, they all fall down. Vietnam being the first domino, then Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, the rest of Indochina, then Thailand, Burma, India, the Philippines, and Indonesia. So it was strategic. We were afraid that if we fell, it would really damage our position in Southeast Asia. So
it's interesting, every time we come here and shoot a program about anything military with Eisenhower, it is so easy to put it in current day point of view, because this little map right here that we have laying in front of us, just give a quick shot for Dave, we'll take a picture of it after a while. Well, China at the top, and all that list of countries you just went through the rest of the way down the peninsula is still in the news every day.
Oh, yes.
And the concerns may be nuanced a bit, but they're geopolitically exactly the same. It's the loss of freedom versus the gain of control. And that's an issue today. Dwight David Eisenhower presided over a time and period of history and places in history that are just so relevant to those of us today, and if you're 16 years old watching TV today, to you.
And this map you showed is actually something that Eisenhower had in his office at Gettysburg.
Oh, really?
So.
I don't see any pinholes in it like it is if it was in my office. They took a little better care of things, I think. But what a wonderful artifact to talk about to start our discussion about Vietnam. So relevant to us in Abilene, Kansas. I was at a ceremony here on campus a while back, and it was Let's Promote Hope. And it's the effort to reduce suicide in our retired military, active military population. I looked around the room a bit. There were some Vietnam vets standing in the room. We're here by Fort Riley. We've always had military history here. Fort Riley's an old fort. So we have a fairly significant population of Vietnam veterans in our area, in our market area, if you want to think of it through the lens. So there's a lot of people watching this who either are or have in their family Vietnam veterans. This program on the 14th is aimed at helping, serving, and rewarding and thanking those people.
Yes. And it even goes back to, we have a wonderful little button here that Mamie donated to the library that says, "I'm backing our men in Vietnam." So
yeah.
Mamie realized at that time, you know, we think of the protests against the Vietnam War, and the lack of recognition that veterans received when they returned from Vietnam. But Mamie saw that it was the men. That's who we should have been honoring all the time, not. You know,
Well, the three of us on camera today, we certainly have memory of Vietnam War, and you probably have a very clear memory of the Vietnam War.
A little bit.
So it gives us a chance with Why Like Ike to speak to the issue. So we have some stuff on the table that's Vietnam era, and I like stuff. Everybody knows I like stuff. So we have an inland M2 carbine here, 30 carbine setting in front of me. One of the things about the Eisenhower Presidential Library is it's a great place for artifacts to be preserved. I think of preservation of artifacts. What does a little 30 caliber carbine mean to the future, the preservation of that? Well, it's point in time in history. If it depends. If you're a martial arts-oriented person, you might be interested in the function of this weapon. You might be interested in the things about its ballistics and all that. But if you're just a student of history and you don't care anything about guns, why is this carbine interesting to you? It was one of the earliest attempts by the U.S. military to make a lightweight weapon that could be carried by officers or not direct combatants that weren't expected to use it much, but still would have the ability to protect their life. It's part of the evolution of the modern assault weapon. So if you're a weapons-oriented person, very cool to have an M2 carbine on the bench in front of you today. If you're just a history person, you have to look at history through the eyes of the stuff, of the things that were invented during that period of time. I love that sort of thing.
And thanks to our great museum staff here, they have shared that the United States actually sent shipments of these carbines to the Army of the Republic of Vietnam in the early years of the war. So
yeah, these little carbines showed up in a lot of areas because they were light, easy to use, and all of those features, and they manufactured them in the millions. So I don't have a number, but this is inland. It was a GM division of General Motors that manufactured this carbine. So, you know, just like World War II, where you had Singer sewing machines making the M1 rifle, many companies got in on making these carbines. So, interesting story for me. I love stuff. So you have a Laws rocket over there, Dave.
Oh yeah, a Law light anti-tank weapon. All I can say is I fired it once in training at Fort Polk.
Did you?
I hit what I was shooting at, and that's the only time I ever touched one. As one fire and dispose of it. That's the way those worked.
Right. So I remember first time I ever saw one of any way, shape, or form was really when Clint Eastwood used it in a movie. But again, the Laws rocket, manufacturing, design, the invention thereof, it's an important part of military history. It was a very effective weapon then, and its successors are very effective weapons now, and we have them at the Eisenhower Presidential Library. All right, I want to go back to Vietnam and on the 14th. Do you have, other than a general mission of honoring people, is there something about this event that people are going to want to know, Pam?
I think it's a chance also to honor the Vietnam veterans in the area. Like I said, have them tell their stories. You know, we've lost so many of the World War II veterans. We didn't capture their stories, so that this move toward having current veterans tell their stories, especially Vietnam, is a great opportunity to improve our knowledge of that time and also honor those individuals. And so I think.
Well, I look at these notes we have in front of me and I see decisions, right? This is information. But the intent of information is to make a decision. And at the time that you talked about Eisenhower, and these documents are talking about, we made a decision to try to support Vietnam and support freedom through Vietnam. It went on until the Nixon administration. That's a long time. 51 to 70, what did we pull out, 72?
1975 is when the last people
Saigon, flight out of Saigon was
yeah.
75? Okay. So that's a long time for little Vietnam to be in history. So it must be far more significant than little Vietnam.
Well, and I think, you know, throughout Eisenhower's administration, when he took office, there were only 35 United States military advisors in Vietnam. By the time he left office, there were less than 1,000. And again, they were military advisors. They were not actually combat soldiers. So I don't know if you want to speak more to how he...
Okay, well, as you know, we, after the French lost in Dien Bien Phu, then the great powers China and Russia, for reasons their own, kind of were encouraged a peace conference or a conference to talk about settlement of both Korea and Vietnam. They didn't settle Korea, it's still going on today, and they did make a decision. The Viet Minh really didn't like it, but the kind of China, they didn't want to things get out of hand. They didn't want another Korea, so to speak, so they agreed to divide Vietnam north and south with elections to be held in 1956. Well, the United States immediately made a determination, we're going to support the South Vietnam and make it as viable and independent non-communist state. So that decision made right there in '54. Then the decision was also made to support a leader for this country, and the leader arose. You know, and there's an interesting story here. There's too much we can't tell right here. I wish we could, because it's very interesting. No Dien Diem was the man who. He has bipartisan support throughout the U.S. He had been in the United States for years, and that became the man that the president, the administration decided to support in '54. So then, I guess the background, I think Pam's going to address this a little bit more, but Eisenhower decided to send us a mission over to try and work with GM and kind of advise them in building an army and make certain reforms. So that man was one of his World War II Corps commanders, General Joe, or called Lightning Joe Collins.
Yep,
you know?
That's the memorandum I have in front of me. Yeah, it's sobering to think of Eisenhower, who, as a soldier, hated war like only soldiers can hate war. Listening to you say Korea hadn't been settled, it's still unsettled today. The prospect of dealing with Vietnam as a war, I cannot imagine that Eisenhower had any positive thoughts about that at all. Any desire to see a new war prosecuted in Southeast Asia, I cannot imagine him doing so. Yet, decisions still have to be made.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And he relied on General Collins to kind of be that boots on the ground person to inform him about what was going on. And Collins came back, gave his report, and recommended not supporting Diem and switching to another Vietnamese kind of counterpart of Diem. And that was kind of the decision made, and then next thing we knew, 5 hours later, there was an uprising against Diem, and the decision was reversed, and they decided to back Diem. Diem did come to the United States. Eisenhower met with him, presented a wonderful ivory lamp to Eisenhower that's actually on display in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. currently.
I'm always sobered in these conversations, no matter where we start, that I'm always ending somewhere with a very sobering thought. The weight of the decisions that we're talking about here are nearly unimaginable to the common man, I think. But if you pondering those things, and you're a student of history and you want to know more, why Like Ike show is for you. because it just gives you a taste of what you can do by walking in the door and spending some time in the archives researching these things. Copies of these things are available to you to read. You can go about the educating of the next generation, which you do, Pam. All of those things, that's all part of the mission of Dwight David Eisenhower here at the Library, Museum, Boyhood Home. We had a great opportunity to be reminded of that relevancy today. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Pam, for coming. I know we're out of time. I wish I could play with the artifacts a little longer, but I guess they're going to turn the lights off and take my gloves away, and I have to go on. Thanks for helping me make Why Like Ike today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Folks, please remember April 14th. Come to the campus. Enjoy the program that day. You'll learn a lot and you'll be inspired. For the Eisenhower Presidential Library Museum Boyhood Home, I'm Dennis Weiss, wishing you a great day.